Chapter 7. When Martha let herself into her flat that night, she was welcomed by another beside Flicker. "You naughty Martha," whispered Claire. "What do you mean by coming home so late, all tired out and worked to death? It is shameful, but here's a good cup of hot chocolate and some big plummy buns to cheer you up. And I've got some good news for you besides. I didn't mean to tell right off, but I just can't keep it in for another minute. I've got a job. A fine $300 a year and home and laundry job, and a raise as soon as I show I'm worth it. Now, what do you think of that? Isn't it splendid? Isn't it bully?" She had noiselessly guided Martha into her own room, got her things off, and seated her in a comfortable Morris chair before the lighted oil stove, from whose pierced iron top a golden light gleamed cheerily, reflecting on the ceiling above in a curious pattern. "Be careful of the chocolate, it's burning hot. I kept it simmering till I heard you shut the vestibule door. And, oh yes, no danger in sipping it that way, but you haven't asked a single thing about my job. How I came to know of it in the first place, and how I was clever enough to get it after I'd applied. You don't look a bit pleased and excited over it. You bad Martha, and you ought to be so glad, because I won't need to spend anything like all the money I'll get. I'm to have my home and laundry free, and one can't make any outside expenses in a boarding school way off in Schoharie, and so I can send you a lot and a lot of dollars till we're all squared up and smoothed out, and you won't have to work so hard any more. And say now, Miss Clare, you certainly are the fastest thing on record. If you'd been born a train, you'd have been an express, sure pop and no mistake. Didn't I tell you to hold on, passionate and uncomplaining, till I give you the sign? Didn't I say I had my eye on a job for you that was a job worth talking about, one that'd be satisfactory all round? Well, then, and here you are, telling me about you going to the old Harry, or some such, with home and laundry thrown in. Not on your life you ain't, Miss Clare, and that, begging your pardon, is all there is to it." "But Martha—" "Don't let's waste no more words. The thing ain't to be thought of." "But, Martha, it's over 2 weeks since you said that about having an idea about a certain job for me that was going to be so splendid. Don't you know it is? And I thought it had fallen through. I didn't like to speak about it for fear you'd think I was hurrying you, but 2 weeks are 2 weeks, and I can't go on indefinitely staying here and getting so deep in debt I'll never be able to get out again. And I saw this advertisement in the Outlook. 'Twas for a college graduate to teach high school English in a girls' boarding school, and I went to the agency, and they were very nice, and told me to write to the principal, and I did. Told her all about myself, my experience, tutoring, and all that, and this morning came the letter saying she'd engaged me. I can tell you all about Schoharie, Martha. It's upstate, and Miss Clare, child, no, it won't do. I can't consent. I can't have you throwing away golden opportunities to work like a Toojan for them as'll stint you in the wash, and probably give you oleomargarine instead of butter, and cold storage eggs that had forgot there was such a thing as a hen, long before they ever was laid away. I wasn't born yesterday myself, and I know how they treat the teachers in some of them schools. The young lady scholars, so stylish and rich, as full of airs as a music box, snubbing the teacher because they're too ignorant to know how smart she has to be to get any knowledge into their stupid heads, and the principal always eyeing you like a minx, lest you might be wasting her precious time and not earning the elegant salary she gives you, including your home and laundry. Oh my, I know a thing or two about them schools, and a few other places. No, Miss Clare, dear, it won't do, and besides I have you bespoke for Mrs. Sherman. The last thing before I come away from the house this night she sent for me upstairs and asked me didn't I know someone could engage with her for Radcliffe, to learn him his lessons and how to be a little lady and such like. She wants, as you might say, a trained mother for him, while his own untrained one is out gallivanting the streets, shopping and playing bridge and attending the horse show. I hemmed and hawed and scratched my head to see if happen I didn't know anybody suitable, and after a while, not to seem to make you too cheap or not to look like I was jumping down her throat, I told her. Curious enough, I do know just the one I think will please you, if you can get her. Then she asked me a lot about you, and I told her what I know, and for the rest I trusted to Providence, and in the end we made a sort of deal. So's it's all fixed. You're to go there day after tomorrow to talk to her and let her look you over. And if you're the kind of stuff she wants, she'll take a half dozen yards of you, which is the kind of way those folks has with people they pay money to. I promised Mrs. Sherman you'd come, and I couldn't break my word to her, now could I? I'd be like to lose my own job if I did, and I'm sure you wouldn't ask that of me. But, said Claire, troubled, you told me Radcliffe is so unmanageable. Mrs. Slauson devoted herself to her chocolate and buns for a moment or two. Oh, never you fear about Radcliffe, she announced at length. He's a good little fella enough, as little fellas goes. When you know how to handle him, which is right side up, with care, him and me come to an understanding yesterday morning, and he's as meek and gentle as a Baal lamb ever since. I'll undertake you'll have no trouble with Radcliffe. Is this the wonderful plan you spoke of? Is this the job you said was going to be so satisfactory all round? Inquired Claire, her misgivings in connection with her prospective pupil by no means allayed. Well, not exactly. I can't say it is. That job will come later. But we got to be passionate and not spoil it by upsetting our kettles of fish with boarding schools and such nonsense. Meanwhile, we can put in time with Mrs. Sherman, who will pay you well, and won't be too skittish if you just keep a firm hand on her. This morning she got discoursing about everything under the canopy, from nickel-plated bathroom fixings and marble slobs to that state of life unto which it has pleased God to call me. She told me just what I ought to give my family to eat, and how much I ought to pay for it. And I say, but wasn't she grand to have given me all that good advice free? Claire laughed. She certainly was, and now you've just got to go to bed. I don't dare look at the clock, it's so late. Good night, you good Martha, and thank you from way deep down for all you've done for me. But long after Mrs. Slauson had disappeared, the girl sat in the solitude of her shadowy room, thinking, unable to get away from her thoughts. There was something about this plan to which Martha had committed her that frightened, overawed her. She felt a strange impulse to resist it, to follow her own leading and go to the school instead. She knew her feeling was childish. Suppose Radcliffe were to be unruly, why, how could she tell that the girls in the Schoharie school might not prove even more so? The fact was, she argued, she had unconsciously allowed herself to be prejudiced against Mrs. Sherman and the boy by Martha's whimsical accounts of them, good-natured as they were. And this strange premonitory instinct was no premonitory instinct at all. It was just the natural reluctance of a shy nature to face a new and uncongenial situation. And yet, try as she would, she could not shake off the impression that beyond it all there loomed something, a hidden inner sense made her hesitate to approach. Just that moment, a dim, untraceable association of ideas drew her back until she was face to face with a long-forgotten incident in her very little girlhood. Once upon a time, there had been a moment when she had experienced much the same sort of feeling she had now, the feeling of wanting to cry out and run away. As a matter of fact, she had cried out and run away. Why? And from what? As it came back to her, not from anything altogether terrible, on the contrary, something rather alluring, but so unfamiliar that she had shrunk back from it, protesting, resisting. What was it? Claire suddenly broke into a smothered little laugh and covered her face with her hands before the vision of herself, squawking madly like a startled chicken and running away from big, handsome 12-year-old Bobby Van Brandt, who had just announced to the world at large that he liked Claire Lang a lot, and she was his best girl, and he was going to kiss her. She had been mortally frightened, had screamed and run away, but so unaccountable is the heart of woman, she'd never liked Bobby quite so well after that, because he'd shown the white feather and hadn't carried out his purpose, in spite of her. But if she should scream and run away now, there would be none to pursue her. Her foolish outburst would disturb no one. She could cry and run, and there would be no big Bobby Van Brandt or anyone else to hear and follow. An actual echo of the cries she had not uttered seemed to mock her foolish musing. She paused and listened. Again and again came the muffled sounds, and at last, so distinct they seemed, she went to her door, unlatched it, and stood listening on the threshold. From Martha's room rose a deep rumble, as of a distant murmurous sea. Mr. Slawson, he's awake. He must have heard the crying too. Oh, it's begun again. How awful! Martha, what is it? Oh, what is it? For Mrs. Slawson had appeared in her own doorway, and was standing night-robed and ghostly, listening attentively to the intermittent signs of distress. It's that bloomin' Dutchman Langbine across the hall. Every time he goes on a toot, he comes back and wallops his wife for it. Go to bed, Miss Clare, child, and don't let it worry you. It ain't your funeral, came the voice of big Sam Slawson from within his chamber. Just what I say to you, my dear, it ain't your funeral. Come back, Martha, and go to bed. Well, that's another pair of shoes entirely, Sammy, whispered Martha. This business has been going on long enough, and I ain't proposing to put up with it no longer. Such a state of things has nothing to recommend it. If it'd help such a poor ninny as Mrs. Longbine any to beat her, I'd say go ahead. Never mind us. But you couldn't pound sense into a softy like her, no matter what you done. In the first place, she lets that fella get away from her evenings when if she had an ounce of sense, she could keep him sticking so close at home a capsin plaster wouldn't be in it. Then, when he comes home a little the worse for wear, she ups and reproaches him, which God knows that ain't no time to argue with a man. You don't want to argue with a fellow when he's so. You just want to tell him. Tell him with the help of a broomstick if you want to, but tell him or leave him alone. And it's bad for the children, all this is. It's bad for Cora and Francie. What idea'll they get of the holy estate of matrimony? I should like to know. That the man has the upper hand. That's a nice notion for a girl to grow up with nowadays. Hark, my, but he's given it to her good and plenty this time. Sammy Slawson, shame on you, man, to let a poor woman be beat like that and never raise a hand to save your own children from being old maids. Another scream out of her, and I'll go in myself in the face of you. Now, Martha, be sensible, pleaded Sam Slawson. You can't break into a man's house without his consent. Can't I? Well, just you watch me close and you'll see if I can't. You won't make yourself liable to the law. He's her husband, you know. She can complain to the courts if she's got any kick coming, but it's not my business to go interfering between husband and wife. What God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. Martha wagged an energetic assent. Sure, that certainly lets you out, but there ain't no mention made of woman not being on the job, is there? She covered the narrow width of the hall in a couple of strides and beat her knuckles smartly against the panel of the opposite door. By this time, the baluster railing all the way up was festooned with white-clad tenants bending over, looking down. Martha, protested Sam Slawson, you're in your nightgown. You can't go round like that. Everybody's looking at you. Say, you, Mr. Langbine in there, open the door. It's me, Mrs. Slawson. Let me in, was Martha's only reply. Her keen ear pressed against the panel, heard nothing in response but an oath, following another even more ungodly sound, and then the choking misery of a woman's convulsive sobs. Mrs. Slawson set her shoulder against the door, braced herself for a mighty effort, and "Did you ever see the like of her?" muttered Sam, as, still busy fastening the garments he had hurriedly pulled on, he followed his wife into the Langbines' flat, into the Langbines' bedroom. There he saw her resolutely march up to the irate German, swing him suddenly about, and send him crashing, surprised, unresisting, to the opposite side of the room. For a second she stood regarding him scornfully. "You poor low-lived Dutchman, you!" she brought out with deliberation. "What do you mean, laying your hand to a woman who hasn't the strength or the spirit to turn to and lick you back? Why don't you fight a fella your own size and sect? That's fair play. A fine man you are. A fine neighbour you are. Just let me hear a peep out of you and I'll thrash you this minute to within an inch of your life. I don't need no law nor no policeman to keep the peace in any house where I live. I can keep the peace myself, or I have to lick every tenant in the place. I'm the law and the policeman on my own account, and if you budge from that floor till I tell you get up, I'll come over there and sit down on you so hard your wife won't know you from a pancake in the morning. I'll show you the power of the press." Sam Slosson was no coward, but his face was pallid with consternation at Martha's hardihood. His mighty bulk, however, seemed to supplement hers, had its effect on the sobered German. He did not attempt to rise. "As to you, you poor weak sister," said Mrs. Slosson, turning to the wife, "you've had your last licking so long as you live in this house, believe me. I'm a hard-working woman, but I'm never too tired or too busy to come in and take a round out of your old man if you should ever dare lay finger to you again. I don't mind a friendly scrap once in a while with a neighbour. My muscles is good for more than your fat, beer-drinking Dutchman's any day. Let him up and try him onst, and he'll see. Why don't you have some style about you and land him one where it'll do the most good, or else leave him? But no, you wouldn't do that. I know you wouldn't. Some women has to cling to something, no matter if they have to support it themselves." Mrs. Longbane's inarticulate sobbing had passed into a spasmodic struggle for breathless utterance. "He don't mean no harm, Miss Slosson. He's all right when he's sober. Only it breaks my heart when he whips me, and I don't deserve it." "Breaks your heart? 'Tain't your heart I'm worrying about. If he don't break your bones, you're in luck." "And I try to be a good wife to him. I tend him hand and foot." "Yes, I know you do," returned Martha dryly. "But suppose you just try the foot in the future. See how it works." "I do my best mit trying to be good cook. I keep his house so clean as a bin. What I don't do, God weiß, I don't know it. I ain't asked him for ein cent already. I ain't trouble him mit pills off of the grocer, or the butcher, or anyone. I makes laundry every week for some little peoples, and mit mine own money I pays my bills. When you tell me how it is, I could make everything more smoother for him. I do it." "That's exactly the trouble," proclaimed Mrs. Slosson conclusively. "You make 'em too smooth. You make 'em so smooth they're actually slippery. No wonder the poor fella falls down. No man wants to spend all his life skating round doing fancy figure stunts because his wife's a dummy. Let him get down to hard earth, and if he kicks, heave a rock at him. He'll soon stand up and walk straight like a little man. Let him lend a hand with the duty business for a change. It'll take his attention off'n himself, give him a rest from thinking he's an angel and that you hired out when you married to him to shout glory every time he flaps a wing. That sort of thing ain't healthy for men. It don't agree with their constitutions. And now, good night to you, and may you have sweet dreams. Mr. Longbine, I ain't the slightest objection to your getting up if you want to. You know me now. I'm by the day, as you may have heard, but I can turn my hand to an odd job like this now and then by the night, if that's necessary. So let me hear no more from you, sir, and then we'll all be good friends like we're parting now. Good night." End of chapter 7. Read by Sandra.